Welcome back. Reporter panel time. Politico White House reporter and, importantly, co-author of its West Wing Playbook newsletter, Sophia, and Semafor White House correspondent, Shelby Talcott. Sophia, let's start with you. You talked to the president yesterday about the war in Iran. What did he tell you?
He told me that Iran is running out of launchers. Look, as we enter almost 1 week of this rapidly escalating war in the Middle East, this question of whether both sides can sustain this level of fire, right? The Pentagon today said that the U.S. has what it needs to do, and President Trump insisting to me that the U.S. has unlimited weapons. He also told me that he's open to working with surviving members of the Iranian regime. It's kind of a sign that he's not necessarily looking for regime change. He's looking for regime behavioral change. That's an observation that one of my colleagues, Nahal Tusi, made. And then finally, President Trump told me he really doesn't care if Iran comes to the U.S. for the World Cup. And that was something that really shocked FIFA as well as the soccer world overall.
And Shelby, you have some reporting about the Vice President, JD Vance, and his role and his thoughts about this going in and then once it began.
Yeah, we've heard very little from the vice president on the war in Iran, which is actually kind of unusual. He's very well known for being pretty outspoken and loud, particularly on X. But what he has been doing in the past few days is finally defending the U.S. operation in Iran. And his core argument is that this is different than past U.S. conflicts. And the reason he says this is different is because President Trump is not going to bring the U.S. into a long conflict, and because the president, he says, has clear defined goals. And this is really notable, I think, when we're thinking about 2028, which, when you talk to the vice president's team, they say he's not thinking about 2028, but a lot of people are already thinking about the next election. And it's important because for a long time, the vice president really was known as a staunch anti-interventionalist, as a real America First ally. And so now I think his comments here, and especially how this conflict ends up going for the U.S., it's going to come back to him either in a positive or a negative way when and if he decides to run for president again.
And Shelby, in this regard, it's worth reminding ourselves that during what was called Signalgate, one of the things that emerged was the vice president was hesitant in that initial appraisal of whether it was a good idea to send all those missiles against Houthi targets in and around Yemen.
Yeah, and we have heard also that even with this Iran attack, he was hesitant as well. And ultimately, he decided that if the administration was going to go forward, this attack needed to be swift, it needed to be aggressive, and that's what we're seeing the U.S. do. But there were moments in all of this when the administration was talking about this where the vice president expressed some concerns, even if he ultimately ended up on the side of defending the U.S. operations. And what's also interesting is, remember, this operation, the president launched this while he was at Mar-a-Lago. The vice president was back here in Washington. I'm told that he was in the Situation Room on a conference call with the president, but he was not actually at Mar-a-Lago during those operations when it first launched this past weekend.
Interesting developments on the ongoing House Oversight Committee investigation into the Epstein matter and related topics. Yesterday was announced the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick volunteers to testify. And today, the Attorney General Pam Bondi subpoenaed by the House Oversight Committee. Sophia or Shelby, whichever you want to go first, any thoughts?
Look, I think what you're seeing is, a need for some accountability from a grassroots. Like, that's really where it's coming from. Kristi Noem was on the Hill. Tom Tillis really tore into her. I think, you've got, taking a step back, you've got a year of Republicans, appropriators on the Hill. Elon came in. I think there's a lot that goes into some of these hearings, right? Some of the frustrations that you hear from Republican lawmakers, it's not just about the issue at hand. It's not just about the Epstein files. It's not just about one issue of DHS and immigration, right? Kristi Noem was up there, and, she is somebody who oversaw FEMA. There's Republicans who are upset about the disaster response. There's Republicans who are concerned about CISA. There's a number of issues, and some of the frustrations that you see boiled into one question. That is the result of, more than a year's worth of private, behind-the-scenes bubblings of this pent-up concern about some of what the Trump administration is doing behind closed doors.
House Oversight Committee also very curious about fraud in Minnesota, and the governor, Tim Walz, was before the committee today, and he had this exchange with the Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer. Let's play it.
When fraud concerns were raised in non-emergency medical transportation, did your administration stop payments?
Chairman, if I could mention what a stop payment meant by what the administration did last week is 400,000 children without health care. Are you stopping payment if one person?
We believe that's your fault and the Attorney General's fault, because you do nothing about fraud, even though everyone in America sees
our Medicare error rate is lower than your state.
Fraud. You have been defrauded. You have not been good stewards of the taxpayer dollars.
Shelby, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to have the last word on this or any other topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that Republicans are making a big deal about this. This is a huge scandal in Minnesota, and it is also comes under a Democratic lawmaker, right? And so they're really going to lean into this. When I talk to administration officials and when we talk to Republicans, even outside of the administration, they're pointing to the fact that this focus could help them in the midterms, right? It is a reminder of a big state, an important state that gets talked about a lot, messing up under a Democratic lawmaker. And as the midterms draw closer, and as the White House becomes more and more concerned about whether they're going to be able to take control of the Senate and the House, these things matter a lot. And so you're seeing how they're sort of using that and having these conversations and having this testimony. I expect this to continue. I expect Republicans to keep talking about this for months to come.
Sophia
Until they lose the House, which they may.
Indeed. Sophia Kai, Shelby Talcott, thank you very, very